The great chamber of the Galactic Assembly stretched for kilometers in every direction, its curved walls displaying the light of 1 billion stars. And Ambassador Elena Vasquez had never felt smaller in her entire life. She stood at the center of the speaking platform, a tiny human figure surrounded by thousands of alien delegates who represented civilizations older than Earth's oldest mountains, and she could feel their eyes upon her like the weight of entire worlds. The assembly had existed for 4 million years, gathering species from across the galaxy to discuss trade and war and the endless business of civilization. And humanity had been a member for only 200 years, which made them infants in the eyes of beings who remembered when their own stars were young. "The representative from Earth may speak," announced the eldest counselor, a crystalline being named Vrethalin whose body caught the light and scattered it into rainbows, and whose voice carried the patience of 2 million years of life. Elena stepped forward and activated her translator, knowing that her words would be heard by 4,000 species in 4,000 languages, and she spoke with all the dignity she could summon. "Honored delegates of the Galactic Assembly, I come before you today to request aid for my people," she said, and already she could hear the whispers beginning, the soft sounds of amusement that always followed when humans dared to speak in this chamber. "The Vraxith Dominion has declared war upon Earth, and their fleet of 10,000 warships approaches our solar system as I speak, and we ask that the Assembly honor its charter of mutual defense." The whispers grew louder, and Elena saw several delegates openly laughing, their various mouths and sound-producing organs creating a symphony of mockery that echoed through the vast space. A massive creature rose from the delegation of the Thorax Empire, its 4 arms spreading wide in a gesture of dismissal, and its voice boomed across the chamber like thunder. "The humans ask for our protection," it said, and the translator carried not just the words but the contempt behind them. "These soft creatures who have barely learned to travel between stars now expect us to fight their battles for them." More laughter followed, and Elena kept her face carefully neutral even as her hands curled into fists at her sides. Another delegate spoke, this one a being of pure energy contained within a magnetic field, and its voice crackled with static as it said, "Perhaps the humans should not have drawn the attention of the Dominion if they could not defend themselves, for the galaxy does not protect those too weak to survive." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but she was cut off by another voice, and then another, and soon the chamber was filled with a chorus of ridicule that seemed to come from every direction at once. "Their ships are primitive. Their weapons are laughable. They have no shields worth mentioning. They still use chemical propulsion for their smaller vessels. My people were building empires when humans were still living in caves." The eldest counselor raised one crystalline limb, and the chamber slowly fell silent, for even the most arrogant species respected Vrethalin's ancient authority. "We shall vote on the matter," Vrethalin said, and its voice was neither kind nor cruel, but simply neutral in the way of beings who had seen too much to feel strongly about anything. "All those in favor of invoking the Mutual Defense Charter on behalf of humanity, signal now." Elena watched the voting lights appear across the chamber, and her heart sank as she saw the result, for out of 4,000 delegations, only 17 had voted in humanity's favor, and most of those were species so small and weak that their support meant nothing. "The motion fails," Vrethalin announced. "The Assembly has determined that humanity is not strategically valuable enough to warrant collective defense, and Earth must face the Vraxith Dominion alone." The laughter returned, louder than before, and Elena heard voices calling out suggestions that humans should simply surrender, that they should beg the Dominion for mercy, that they should accept their place as a conquered species and be grateful if the Vraxith allowed them to survive at all. She stood there in the center of that vast chamber, surrounded by the mockery of beings who considered themselves her superiors, and something cold and hard settled into her chest like a piece of iron. For 200 years, humanity had endured this treatment, had smiled and nodded and accepted the scraps that the elder races threw their way, had pretended to be grateful for the privilege of existing in the shadow of greater civilizations. For 200 years, they had played the role of the humble newcomers, the primitive species still learning to walk among the stars, the children who should be seen and not heard. And for 200 years, they had been hiding something. Alina raised her hand, and her gesture was so unexpected that the laughter slowly died away as delegates turned to watch the tiny human who dared to demand attention. "I have heard the decision of this assembly," she said, and her voice was calm in a way that made several of the closer delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats, "and I accept that we must face this threat alone." She paused, and the silence in the chamber grew heavy with something that the assembled species could not quite identify. "But I wish to say something before I leave," Alina continued, and she looked around the chamber at the thousands of faces and forms and beings that had dismissed her people as insignificant. "You have called us primitive, and you have called us weak, and you have laughed at our ships and our weapons and our place in this galaxy." Her eyes found Vrethelin, and she met the gaze of the ancient crystalline being without flinching. "You have forgotten something important," she said. "You have forgotten that young species have something that old species have lost, and that something is the memory of fear, the memory of looking up at the stars and seeing only darkness and danger and the possibility of extinction." She took a single step forward, and her voice dropped to something that was almost a whisper, yet somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. "You have forgotten what it means to fight for survival, because you have been safe for so long that you have forgotten there was ever anything to fear." Alina smiled then, and it was not a pleasant smile, and several delegates felt a chill run through their various nervous systems without understanding why. "Then humanity will defend itself," she said, and each word fell into the silence like a stone dropping into still water. "Watch closely." She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in a chamber that had suddenly gone completely silent, and not a single delegate laughed. The eldest counselor watched her go, and for the first time in 1,000 years, Vrethelin felt something that might have been unease stirring in its ancient consciousness. The doors of the assembly closed behind the human ambassador, and the delegates looked at one another with expressions that ranged from confusion to curiosity to the faintest hints of concern. But none of them truly understood what they had just witnessed, and none of them could have imagined what was coming. In the void of space, far beyond the reach of any scanner or sensor that the Galactic Assembly possessed, something stirred in the darkness between stars, and humanity's long silence was about to end. 100 years before Ambassador Vasquez stood in the Galactic Assembly, a young physicist named Yuki Tanaka stared at her computer screen in a laboratory hidden deep beneath the mountains of Japan, and what she saw there changed the course of human history. The signal had come from deep space, carried on waves that no instrument should have been able to detect, because the waves themselves were made of something that officially did not exist in any form that could be measured or touched or seen. Dark matter, the invisible substance that made up most of the universe, was not supposed to interact with normal matter in any meaningful way, and yet here was a signal, clear and unmistakable, pulsing through the darkness like a heartbeat. "Dr. Tanaka," said her assistant, a nervous young man named Kenji who had not slept in 3 days, "are you seeing what I am seeing?" Yuki nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the screen, and she whispered, "Someone out there has learned to use dark matter, not just to detect it, but to shape it and control it and send messages through it." Within a week, Yuki's discovery had reached the highest levels of every government on Earth, and within a month, a secret meeting was held in a location that would never appear on any map. And the leaders of humanity made a decision that would remain hidden for a century. They called it Project Obsidian Veil, and its purpose was simple: Humanity would learn to master dark matter, no matter how long it took, and they would tell no one. The galaxy believed that humans were primitive, and humanity decided to let them keep believing it. Over the following decades, the greatest minds of Earth worked in hidden facilities scattered across the solar system, in bases buried beneath the ice of Europa, in stations hidden in the permanent shadow of Mercury, in vast construction yards floating in the darkness of the Oort cloud where no alien scanner could ever reach. They failed more times than they succeeded, and many good people died in experiments that went wrong, and there were moments when the whole project seemed impossible, when the mysteries of dark matter appeared beyond human understanding. But humans had a quality that the elder races had long forgotten, a stubborn refusal to accept defeat, a burning need to survive that came from millions of years of evolution on a dangerous world where giving up meant death. Yuki Tanaka grew old in the service of the project, her hair turning white and her body growing frail, but her mind remained sharp, and she watched as younger scientists built upon her work and pushed further into the unknown. She was 97 years old when they finally succeeded, when the first dark matter reactor came online in the heart of a ship that would be named Prometheus, and she wept tears of joy as she watched the impossible become real. The ship did not look like any vessel that the galaxy had ever seen, because it was not built according to the principles that other species understood, and its hull was made of materials that existed in a state between matter and energy, solid and yet not solid, visible and yet capable of vanishing completely. "We did it," Yuki whispered, and her voice was weak but filled with wonder. "We actually did it." She died 3 months later, peacefully in her sleep, and she was buried in a secret ceremony attended only by those who knew what she had accomplished, and her grave was marked with a simple stone that gave no hint of the revolution she had sparked. The project continued without her, and the fleet grew, ship by ship, each one more advanced than the last, until 300 warships floated in the darkness of the Oort cloud, invisible to every sensor in the galaxy, waiting for the day when they would be needed. And through all those years, humanity kept playing its role, sending primitive ships to the stars, pretending to struggle with basic technology, acting impressed by the achievements of species that had no idea what was being built in the shadows. The elder races laughed at human ships and human weapons and human ambition, and humanity smiled and nodded and thanked them for their wisdom, all while counting the days until the mask could finally fall away. Now, 100 years after Yuki Tanaka first saw that impossible signal, the day had finally come. Admiral James Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, and he watched through the viewscreen as the Vraxith Dominion fleet entered human space, 10,000 warships arranged in a formation that spoke of absolute confidence, of the certainty that this would be a quick and easy conquest. "Admiral," said his communications officer, "the Vraxith are broadcasting a message to Earth." "Let me hear it," Okonkwo said, and his voice was calm despite the tension that filled the bridge. The Vraxith admiral appeared on the screen, a creature of scales and fangs and eyes that held nothing but contempt, and it spoke in a voice that expected obedience. "Humans of Earth, your pathetic civilization ends today, and you will surrender immediately, or we will destroy every world you possess and enslave every member of your species. For we are the Vraxith Dominion, and we have consumed 12 species before you, and we will consume 12 more after you are gone." Okonkwo said nothing, and the Vraxith admiral took his silence for fear. "Your galactic assembly has abandoned you," the creature continued, and its mouth twisted into what might have been a smile. "No one is coming to save you, little humans, and your fleet of 200 primitive vessels cannot hope to stand against our might." The admiral paused, clearly expecting begging or pleading or offers of surrender. Instead, Okonkwo simply smiled, and it was the same smile that Elena Vasquez had worn in the assembly chamber, cold and knowing, and filled with something that the Vraxith could not understand. "Admiral," Okonkwo said, and his voice carried across space to every ship in the Vraxith fleet. "I want to thank you for coming here today, because you have saved us the trouble of hunting you down." The Vraxith commander's eyes narrowed in confusion, and before it could respond, Okonkwo turned to his crew and spoke two words that would echo through galactic history. "Veil Protocol." His tactical officer nodded and pressed a single button, and across the solar system, 300 ships received the signal they had been waiting a century to hear. In the Uat cloud, dark matter fields that had hidden the fleet for decades began to collapse, and the ships that had existed in a state of quantum uncertainty suddenly became very, very real. On the Galactic Assembly's observation feed, 4,000 species watched as space itself seemed to shudder, as the darkness between stars twisted and folded and gave birth to something that should not have existed. 300 warships materialized from nothing, their hulls drinking in light, their weapons glowing with energies that no sensor could identify, their very presence a violation of everything the galaxy believed about physics and technology and the limitations of what was possible. The Vraxith admiral stared at the screen, and for the first time in its long and violent life, it felt something that its species had almost forgotten how to feel. Fear. Admiral Okonkwo leaned forward, and his smile widened as he said, "Welcome to human space, Admiral, and please allow me to show you what we have been building while you were busy laughing at us." The eldest counselor Vrethalin, watching from the assembly chamber, whispered words that carried to every delegate in the room. "They were never primitive," Vrethalin said, and its crystalline body trembled with something that might have been awe or terror. "They were hiding, and we never even suspected." The galaxy held its breath, and humanity prepared to show the universe exactly what it was capable of. The Vraxith Admiral Korthax had conquered 17 worlds and destroyed 4 species in its long career, and it had never once felt doubt about the outcome of a battle. But as it stared at the ships that had appeared from nowhere, something cold began to spread through its chest. "What is this?" Korthax demanded, turning to its sensor officer with fury in its eyes. "Where did these vessels come from, and why did you not detect them?" The sensor officer, a younger Vraxith whose scales had gone pale with terror, could only shake its head and say, "Admiral, I do not understand. These ships should not exist. Our sensors cannot even determine what they are made of. They appear to be constructed from materials that our database does not recognize." Korthax turned back to the view screen, and it studied the human fleet with the calculating gaze of a predator, trying to understand a new kind of prey. The ships were unlike anything in the galaxy, their hulls seeming to shift and flow like liquid metal, their surfaces absorbing light in a way that made them difficult to look at directly, as if they existed only partially in normal space. And they were massive, each one easily 3 times the size of the largest Vraxith dreadnought, bristling with weapons that glowed with a cold and terrible light. In the Galactic Assembly Chamber, 4,000 species watched the confrontation unfold on the central display, and not a single being made a sound. The eldest counselor Vrethalin had lived for 2 million years, and had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Yet even Vrethalin found itself unable to look away from the impossible sight before them. "How is this possible?" whispered a delegate from the Thorax Empire, the same being that had mocked humanity only days before. "No species develops this level of technology in 200 years. It takes millennia to achieve such things." A being of pure energy flickered with agitation as it said, "They must have stolen this technology from someone. There is no other explanation." But Vrethalin shook its crystalline head and replied, "No, look at the design philosophy, look at the way the ships move. This is not stolen technology. This is something humans built themselves. Something they created while we were laughing at them." On the bridge of the Prometheus, Admiral Okonkwo watched as the Vraxith fleet tried to reorganize itself. its neat formation breaking apart as captains struggled to understand what they were facing. "Admiral," said his tactical officer, "the Vraxith are charging their weapons. It appears they intend to fire." Okonkwo nodded slowly and said, "Let them, and let the galaxy see what happens." The Vraxith fired first, 10,000 ships releasing a storm of plasma and missiles, and directed energy that turned the space between the fleets into a wall of destruction, enough firepower to crack a planet in half. The human fleet did not move, did not attempt to evade, did not even raise shields. And every single shot passed through them as if they were not there. In the assembly chamber, delegates gasped and cried out in shock, for what they had just witnessed was impossible, absolutely and completely impossible, and yet it had happened right before their eyes. The Vraxith admiral stared at its tactical display, where every shot was marked as a direct hit, and yet the human ships remained completely undamaged. "Fire again," Korthax screamed, and its fleet obeyed, unleashing another barrage that was even more devastating than the first. The same result, the weapons passed through the human ships like light through glass, leaving no damage, no effect, nothing at all. "How?" Korthax whispered, and its voice had lost all of its earlier arrogance. "How is this possible?" Admiral Okonkwo's voice came through the communication channel, calm and almost gentle as he explained. "Your weapons are designed to affect normal matter, Admiral, but our ships exist partially in a state that your science does not even have words for. We are here and we are not here. We are solid and we are not solid, and your weapons cannot hurt what they cannot truly touch." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had grown colder. "But our weapons," Okonkwo said, "our weapons can touch you just fine." He turned to his tactical officer and gave a single nod, and the officer pressed a button that would change the course of galactic history. The Prometheus fired once, a beam of something that was not quite light and not quite energy, something that seemed to tear reality itself as it crossed the distance between the fleets in an instant. The beam struck 40 Vraxith warships, and they did not explode. They simply ceased to exist. One moment they were there, 10,000 tons of metal and weapons and crew, and the next moment there was nothing, not debris, not radiation, not even empty space where they had been, just an absence, a gap in the universe where something had been erased. In the assembly chamber, the silence was so complete that beings could hear their own heartbeats, could hear the soft hum of life support systems, could hear the sound of their own terror. "What was that?" the thorax delegate whispered, and its voice was shaking. "What kind of weapon erases ships from existence?" Vrethalin answered, and its voice was heavy with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. "They have found a way to weaponize dark matter itself. They can unwrite things from spacetime. They can make it so that something never existed at all." The Vraxith Admiral Korthax stood frozen on its bridge, watching as 40 of its ships vanished from the tactical display, and it understood with horrible clarity that this was not a battle it could win. "All ships retreat," Korthax ordered, and its voice cracked with desperation. "Fall back to the fleet carrier. We must escape. We must warn the Dominion." But the human fleet was already moving, spreading out to surround the Vraxith armada, and Admiral Okonkwo's voice came through the channel once more. "There will be no retreat, Admiral," Okonkwo said. "You came here to enslave my people and destroy my world, and now you will stay here and face the consequences of that choice." He leaned forward in his chair, and his eyes were hard as he continued. "But I want you to understand something. We could destroy your entire fleet with a single volley. We could erase 10,000 ships from existence, and there is nothing you could do to stop us." The Vraxith Admiral waited for the killing blow, waited for the darkness that would end everything. But instead, Okonkwo said something that no one expected. "We choose not to." Korthax blinked in confusion, and across the galaxy, 4,000 species leaned forward in their seats, trying to understand what the human meant. "We did not build these ships to become monsters," Okonkwo said. "We built them so that we would never have to be afraid again, and so that we could protect those who cannot protect themselves." He smiled, and it was not the cold smile he had worn before, but something warmer, something almost sad. "You will not die today, Admiral," Okonkwo said, "but you will listen, and you will learn, and then you will carry a message back to your masters." The human fleet began to move, and what followed would be remembered as the most one-sided battle in galactic history, not because of the destruction it caused, but because of the destruction it deliberately avoided. Humanity had revealed its true power, and now the galaxy would see what they chose to do with it. The Battle of Saul lasted exactly 11 minutes, and in that brief span of time, every assumption the galaxy had ever made about warfare was proven wrong. Admiral Okonkwo commanded his fleet with the precision of a surgeon, each ship moving to a predetermined position, each weapon firing at exactly the right moment, and the Vraxith Armada came apart like a toy in the hands of a giant. But it was not destruction that the humans brought, not the annihilation that everyone expected. The human ships fired beams that did not erase, but instead disabled, targeting engines and weapons and shield generators with impossible accuracy, leaving the Vraxith vessels drifting and powerless but completely intact. Ship after ship went dark, their crews still alive, their hulls still whole, but their ability to fight stripped away in an instant. The Vraxith tried everything they could think of, ramming attacks and suicide runs and desperate boarding attempts, but nothing worked. The human ships flowed around them like water around stones, always just out of reach, always one step ahead. In the assembly chamber, the eldest counselor watched with growing amazement, and Vrethalin found itself recalculating everything it thought it knew about this young species. "They are not killing them," Vrethalin said, and its voice carried wonder that it had not felt in a million years. "They have the power to erase that entire fleet from existence, and they are choosing to spare them." The thorax delegate shook its massive head and replied, "It must be a trick. No species with this much power shows mercy. It goes against everything we know about the nature of civilization." But a smaller delegate, a being from a species that had nearly been wiped out by the Vraxith centuries ago, spoke up with tears streaming down its face. "No, I think I understand. They remember what it is like to be weak. They remember what it is like to fear extinction, and they do not want to become the thing they were afraid of." The battle continued, and the human fleet moved through the Vraxith Armada like a wave, leaving disabled ships in their wake. And within minutes, the greatest military force the Dominion had ever assembled was reduced to a field of drifting hulks. Admiral Korthak stood on the bridge of its flagship, surrounded by darkness and silence, and it felt something it had never experienced in its entire life: complete and utter helplessness. The lights flickered and died, the engines went silent, and the only sound was the breathing of its crew, who waited in terror for the end that they were certain would come. But instead of death, there was only a voice, calm and clear, coming through the emergency speakers. "Admiral Korthax," said Okonkwo, "your fleet is disabled, your weapons are offline, and your ships are no longer capable of threatening anyone, but I want you to look around at your crew. I want you to see that they are still alive." Korthax looked, and it was true. Every member of its crew was unharmed, scared beyond reason, but alive and whole. "Why?" Korthax asked, and its voice was barely a whisper. "Why did you spare us?" There was a long pause, and when Okonkwo spoke again, his voice was heavy with something that might have been sorrow. "Because I have read the histories of the species you destroyed," Okonkwo said. "The Valanthi, who made beautiful music that could make any being weep with joy. The Krasari, who built living cities that grew and changed with the seasons. The Morthax, who were pacifists who believed that all life was sacred." He paused, and the silence stretched across the void between them. "I have seen what you took from the galaxy," Okonkwo continued, and I have sworn that humanity will never take anything like that from anyone, not even from creatures like you who deserve nothing but death." Korthax felt something strange stirring in its chest, something that might have been shame, and it asked, "What happens now?" "Now," Okonkwo said, "I am going to let one of your ships go. I will restore power to your fastest cruiser, and you will return to the Dominion, and you will tell your leaders exactly what happened here." "And what message should I carry?" Korthax asked. Okonkwo's voice grew harder, and there was iron beneath the gentleness as he replied, "Tell them that Earth remembers every species they devoured. Tell them that we have recorded the names of every being that died because of their hunger. Tell them that we are coming, not for conquest, but for justice." He paused, and his next words fell like hammer blows. "Tell them that the 12 species they destroyed are going to be avenged, not with genocide, but with something far worse. We are going to free every world they have enslaved. We are going to tear apart their empire piece by piece, and we are going to make sure that they can never hurt anyone ever again." In the assembly chamber, 4,000 species listened to every word, and no one dared to breathe. "Tell them," Okonkwo said, and his voice was almost gentle, "that humanity is not interested in ruling the galaxy. We never wanted power, we only wanted to survive, but now that we have this strength, we have a responsibility to use it wisely." He fell silent, and across the battlefield, a single Vraxith cruiser hummed back to life, its engines glowing as power was restored. "Go," Okonkwo said, "and remember what you saw here today." Admiral Korthax gave an order it had never given in its entire career, a single word that tasted like ash in its mouth: "Retreat." The cruiser turned and fled into hyperspace, carrying with it a message that would shake the foundations of the Vraxith Dominion. Back in the assembly chamber, the silence continued for a long moment after the battle ended, and then Vrethalin spoke, its voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. "In 4 million years of this assembly's history, I have never witnessed anything like what we saw today," Vrethalin said, and its crystalline body seemed to glow with an inner light. "A species with the power to destroy an entire fleet, with the power to erase enemies from existence itself, and they chose mercy." The Thorax delegate stirred uncomfortably and said, "This changes everything. If the humans can defeat the Vraxith, they can defeat anyone. They could conquer the entire galaxy if they wished." But Vrethalin shook its head and replied, "You still do not understand. They had the power to kill 10,000 ships and they did not use it. They had the power to take revenge for centuries of mockery and they did not take it. They had every reason to become tyrants, and they chose to become something else." The eldest counselor turned to face the assembly, and its voice rang out with a certainty that silenced all whispers. "We laughed at them," Vrethalin said. "We dismissed them and mocked them and refused to help them, and they have responded by showing us something we had forgotten, something that our ancient civilizations lost long ago." "What is that?" someone asked. And Vrethalin replied, "Compassion, true compassion, the kind that does not seek reward, the kind that extends even to enemies, the kind that remembers what it means to suffer." The assembly fell silent once more, and far away, the human fleet began the long process of collecting the disabled Vraxith ships, treating the wounded, and preparing for the next phase of their mission. Humanity had won its first battle, but the war for the galaxy's soul had only just begun. 3 days after the Battle of Sol, Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked back into the Galactic Assembly Chamber, and the silence that greeted her was nothing like the silence that had followed her last visit. Before, the silence had been filled with contempt, with the unspoken belief that humans were not worth listening to, with the certainty that whatever she said would be forgotten the moment she stopped speaking. Now the silence was something else entirely. 4,000 species watched as she made her way to the central platform, and in their eyes she saw fear and wonder and confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. The eldest counselor Vrethalin rose to greet her, and for the first time in 200 years, the ancient being bowed its crystalline head to a human. "Ambassador Vasquez," Vrethalin said, and its voice carried a gravity that it had not shown before, "the Assembly welcomes you, and we are prepared to hear whatever proposal you wish to make." Alina stepped onto the speaking platform and looked around at the gathered delegates, at the beings who had laughed at her people and dismissed their pleas and left them to die. She could have demanded anything: revenge for centuries of humiliation, tribute from every species that had mocked them, a position of supreme power over the entire galaxy. She could have threatened them, reminded them of what humanity's ships could do, made them fear her the way they had never feared anything before. Instead, she smiled, and it was not a cold smile or a threatening smile, but simply the smile of a woman who was very tired and very relieved. "I am not here to make demands," Alina said, and her voice was soft but carried clearly through the vast chamber. "I am not here to threaten or to boast or to claim victory over anyone." She paused, and the silence deepened as every being waited for her next words. "I am here to offer something," Alina continued, "something that my people have discussed for a long time, something that we debated even while we were building our fleet, something that we have finally decided to do." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small device, a data crystal that glowed with a soft blue light, and she held it up for everyone to see. "This," she said, "contains the complete technical specifications for our dark matter technology, every equation, every blueprint, every piece of research that we have gathered over the past century." The chamber erupted in whispers and gasps, for what she was offering was the most valuable thing in the galaxy, the secret that had allowed humanity to defeat the Vraxith, the power that could make any species invincible. "You are giving this away," demanded the Thorax delegate, and its voice was thick with disbelief. "You are simply handing over the greatest weapon in galactic history." Alina nodded and replied, "Yes, but with conditions." The whispers died away as she continued, "We will share this technology with any species that agrees to join a new alliance, an alliance dedicated to one simple principle: that no species should ever face extinction alone." She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of delegates throughout the chamber, and her voice grew stronger as she spoke. "We remember what it felt like to stand in this chamber and beg for help. We remember what it felt like to be told that our lives were not worth saving. We remember the fear and the despair, and the terrible loneliness of facing death with no one standing beside us." Her voice caught slightly, and she took a breath before continuing. "And we have decided that no other species should ever have to feel that way, not the weak, not the strong, not even our enemies." Vrethalin leaned forward and asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Why? You could rule us all with this power. You could build an empire that would last for millions of years. Why would you give that away?" Alina was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Because we remember something that you have forgotten," she said. "We remember what it is like to be small, to be afraid, to look up at the stars and wonder if we are alone in the universe." She smiled, and there were tears in her eyes as she continued. "We did not build these ships to become gods. We built them because we were terrified, because we knew that the universe was full of dangers and we had no one to protect us." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, but it still carried to every corner of the chamber. "We built them so that we would never have to be afraid again," she said. "And now that we have them, we realize that true safety does not come from power alone. It comes from having others who will stand beside you, who will fight for you, who will never abandon you no matter how dark things become." She held up the data crystal once more and said, "This is our offer. Join us, stand with us. And together, we will make sure that no species ever has to face the darkness alone again." The silence that followed was the deepest silence the assembly had ever known. And then slowly, One delegate rose from its seat, a small being from a species called the Velari, whose homeworld had been threatened by the Vraxith for generations, and it began to applaud. Another delegate rose, and another, and soon the sound of approval was spreading through the chamber like a wave, beings of every shape and size and form rising to their feet and adding their voices to the growing chorus. The thorax delegate, who had mocked humanity so cruelly, stood and bowed its massive head, and its voice was rough with emotion as it said, "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything, and I would be honored to stand with humanity." More and more delegates rose, hundreds, then thousands, until nearly the entire assembly was on its feet, and the sound of their acclaim echoed through the chamber like thunder. Vrethalin watched it all with ancient eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall, and the crystalline being felt something it had not felt in a million years: hope. When the noise finally died down, Vrethalin spoke, and its voice carried a warmth that surprised even itself. "In 4 million years, this assembly has never given a standing ovation," Vrethalin said. "We have debated and argued and sometimes even fought, but we have never come together like this, never united behind a single cause." The eldest counselor turned to Alina and continued, "You have given us something more valuable than technology, Ambassador. You have given us something we had lost long ago." "What is that?" Alina asked. "Purpose," Vrethalin replied. "A reason to believe that the galaxy can be more than just a collection of species fighting for survival, a vision of what we could become if we stood together instead of apart." Alina smiled through her tears and said, "That is all we ever wanted, to not be alone, to have friends in the darkness, to know that when the next threat comes, we will face it together." She looked around at the chamber full of beings who had once despised her people, and she saw the beginning of something new, something that had never existed before. "The galaxy expected gods of war," Alina said, and her voice carried to every corner of the vast room, "and perhaps that is what we have become, but we choose to be something more." She raised the data crystal high, and its light seemed to fill the entire chamber as she spoke her final words. "We choose to be the ones who remember what it means to be mortal, who remember what it means to fear, and who will use that memory to protect everyone who cannot protect themselves." The assembly erupted in cheers once more, and in that moment the galaxy changed forever. Humanity had revealed its power, and in doing so, had shown the universe something far more important than strength. They had shown it what strength was truly for: